there are those rare geniuses in the world whose ideas and statements seem at first unbelievable to the average person, but after you listen to them carefully and understand what they're speaking about, you realize the genius. And we have with us today one such individual, David Hawkins. Thank you for joining me, David.
That is a terrifying introduction, Jason. How am I going to live up to that?
Well, it's purely factual because when I was first introduced to you, David, your investigative style of locating patents that match the signature of a particular crime, it didn't even make sense to me at first. But of course, you've shown us over the course of several interviews and episodes you've done here on Crowdsource the Truth, and of course your amazing work with Field McConnell at Abel Danger, your colleague and associate for many, many years. You've shown us that this method is not only sound, but amazing in what it reveals in terms of the perpetrators of these various crimes. And today we're going to, of course, be speaking about what appear to be false flag operations related to, in one case, Novicihok gas attributed to the Russian government. But of course, we've been hearing most recently about a chemical gas attack in Syria and the drums of war beating quite loudly. There's been a lot of reporting about U.S. warships moving towards Syria. How, David, would you say this Novicihok attack in the United Kingdom, how has that been used to prepare people for or possibly create a pretext for war against Russia? There's been so much anti-Russia propaganda the past year or two.
Well, good question, Jason, and I guess it goes back to British intelligence. Now, can you hear me all right?
Absolutely.
Okay. So in World War II, a small group that grew, I think, to about 250 people with the nickname Churchill's Toy Shop was formed, directly answerable to Winston Churchill, the late Winston Churchill, whose two grandsons, and we keep coming back to that, one of them is Rupert Soames, who is the chief executive officer of SERCO, which has weaseled its way into every significant United States government department as an outsourcer. And just as a flavor, I'm going to answer the question, but inevitably it's a bit roundabout. So SERCO runs the United States National Visa Center. SERCO runs the United States Patent and Trademark Office. SERCO runs the Defense Ammunition Center. And when I talked to my American friends, I said, what the hell are you guys doing? Why would you allow a British company with what appears, if it was an individual, to have a long criminal record, would you believe, Jason, of moving prisoners around into a crime scene and then putting them back in jail with a nearly perfect alibi that dates back to the predecessor organization of SERCO, which was Radio Corporation of America, Great Britain, 1929, and was probably the company that put together the suite of patents used by the Japanese to attack Pearl Harbor.
Wow.
Right? I mean, it's not, the fact is I invented a patent called the deductive computing machine, so I'm very familiar with this. And the extraordinary thing about patents, or the language of patents, is it's very, very precise. And the reason it's precise is because the patentee, or the inventor, or the assignee, or the prospective owner or custodian of that patent has to go to a patent officer and prove that what they've got is novel, useful, and doable. Right? And
yes.
They invent these. It's an artifact. I'm not sure if that's the right word. It's an unreal or a virtual person who they describe as someone who is skilled in the art. So I think you've had a career in filmmaking, I believe.
Correct.
So, for example, let's say someone has invented a device on a RED camera. I believe RED cameras are quite top-of-the-line cameras.
Indeed.
If you look at the RED camera, they've got a thicket of patents, right? Probably 40 or 50 relating to every element in a RED camera. Now, I'm not in that industry, but let's say you wanted to make a horror film or a snuff film, right? Now, people who make horror films and snuff films, the great majority of them, it's not something that particularly turns my crank, if you will, but they use actors, right?
Yes.
To make a simulation of a horror film or a simulation of a snuff film. Some of those are successful, some not. But that community that makes simulated snuff films would be very well qualified to make an actual snuff film, right?
Certainly people with the skills to make a horror movie would have the skills to make a snuff film, yes.
Right. So if you find or identify actors and crisis actors who are skilled in the art of simulated snuff films, they would be skilled in the same art of making a real snuff film.
Indeed.
And it may very well be that the actors involved in that process are not aware that the simulation is going to turn real.
Right.
So on 911, for example, no, let's go to the Novicihok situation. Right, we're told by Theresa May, who is being advised in the United States Cabinet Office by people who are expert in simulations, including SERCO, what they would like the public at large to believe. And SERCO, at an outfit called Hawkins in the United Kingdom, is engaged in the business of emergency center planning, where they take their client's communication system and they inject fake news or media plays to test the ability, in this case of the British emergency services, to respond to a simulated chemical agent attack. So in the Wiltshire area, just down the road, I think it's about 10 minutes drive from Salisbury, which is a beautiful old cathedral city in the UK, there's a place called Porton Down. Did you ever hear of an outfit called Porton Down?
I've heard of it from you.
Right. Well, Porton Down is developing a whole range of chemical and biological agents and the antidotes for such agents, including the Ames strain of the anthrax bacillus used in the letters that were sent to various senators and media groups after 9/11. Right? So Mr. Mueller, Robert Mueller, the famous former FBI director, he must have known that there were, and I think he became the FBI director around the 5th of September, just a few days before 9/11.
I believe. One
it
week,
4th?
precisely, yes. Now, what would be the name of that facility, David, in Porton Down?
Well, the name of the facility is Porton Down, right? And it's, I think, the Defense Research Agency, right? Porton Down, have you got that?
I've got Defense Science. Well, I'm trying to find it here.
Porton, Porton Down, DOWN. And they've got a whole range of very smart scientists and engineers working on chemical and biological warfare and the antidotes thereof. Right? Now, one of the chemical agents they would have been working on is Novicihok. Now, the accusation is that the only people who had significant stocks of Novicihok were the Russians. But the Russians have quite rightfully pointed out, A, we certainly did have chemical weapons, but they were dismantled under the supervision of the Defense Threat Reduction Agency of the United States. So people from the Defense Threat Reduction Agency would have gone out to various places in Russia and helped them collect and ultimately dispose of their weapons. The particular chemical groups that the British describe as Novicihok, the Russians described as Foliant, F-O-L-I-A-N-T. And the Russians have said, we never use this term Novicihok that you're attributing to us. But however, the word was used by the Russian scientists who fled from Russia to Princeton in New Jersey. I can't remember the guy's name. It's a M-I-L something or other. But he used this term Novicihok. And you know what? The Defense Threat Research or Reduction Agency has a contract with Northwestern University to develop detoxification systems, which the Northwestern University people have patented, to detoxify Novicihok. So there are at least 2 places in the world, one of which attributes and recognizes the chemical systems described by Novicihok, which is Northwestern University, which I think Americans need to be reminded, perhaps, that one of the people who lectured on jurisprudence or justice for children in Northwestern University is a woman called Bernardine Dawn. Does that ring a bell?
Well, you've spoken to me about her before. Is she somehow related to the Weather Underground or something?
She was the leader of the Weather Underground.
There you go.
And Students for a Democratic Society.
I speak to Lee Stranahan about the Weather Underground quite a bit, but I don't know that much about it outside of these. I'm being introduced to it by you and Lee.
Okay, well, Bernardine Dawn designed the bomb that was used to blow up a women's washroom in the Pentagon in 1972.
Right.
She worked with a man called Bill Ayers. They loathe and despise you guys, right?
Yeah.
Not because you're white, because they're white, right? Not because they're Jewish, although they are, it's irrelevant, right? But because they have a Marxist ideology, right? Which would be well accepted by David Rockefeller, the late David Rockefeller, who said the world is ready to move to a supranational government of world bankers and an intellectual elite, of which I guess Bernardine Dawn thinks she's one. One of the seminars Bernardine Dawn gives to young Americans and foreign students is torture, paradigms, and practice.
Yes.
So do Americans really want their young people to go to universities and listen to this crap?
I would think
not.
Well,
I guess they do, until they wake up, right? Which is what yours and my job is, right? I believe, I love that phrase. I think it was a Japanese admiral who said after Pearl Harbor, "We've woken a sleeping giant."
Yes.
You know what, Jason? I think we, Abel Danger, you, and people of good faith, we are a sleeping giant. I can forgive almost everyone for sleeping. I mean, for example, I have some friends that I can start talking at a fairly high level and their eyes glaze over. I sometimes think I should sell myself as a cure for insomnia. But anyway, moving on. So you've got Bill Ayers and Bernardine Dawn, leaders of the Students for a Democratic Society, which is essentially a Marxist depopulation racket, meeting and conspiring together and accepting the general argument that if you want to secure a socialist revolution in the United States, you've got to be ready to kill 25 million Americans. Now, I think that's pretty conservative, right?
Well,
now, how do you kill 25 million Americans? Well, you need weapons of mass destruction, right?
Yeah.
There's a limited number of weapons of mass destruction that would fit that bill of, let's say, killing 25 million Americans. And it goes by the letters CBRNE, chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear, and explosive materials, right? So there's a whole number of government laboratories, some of them that have been spawned by this Marxist depopulation ethic, right? And I think you'll find a great number of those in China. And incidentally, Jason, China is not your friend, right? It is now a totalitarian thugocracy.
Well, not only that, David, just last week there was a pretty dramatic shift that there's been remarkably little reporting on, which was China now purchasing oil with yuan in defiance of the 45-year-old or 40-something-year-old petrodollar system.
Right.
And I would imagine that this is something that the United States and the international banking elite do not like.
Right, right. Now, let me go back, and I've almost, listening to myself, lost track of your original question. Can you just remind me, what was your question?
Just all of these attacks being blamed on Russia, the Novicihok gas attack on a Russian spy and his daughter, or someone who's a Russian, thought to be a Russian spy and his daughter. We've got this gas attack in Syria that's being blamed on Assad, who of course is defended by Russia. It just seems like all of this is being done to really sell the American public and the international public. Of course, this is a coalition that's moving into position outside of Syria to attack, but it really is a proxy war of Western powers versus Russia. And certainly if the horrible outcome were to be the expansion of that war, it would be Russia and China versus the United States, the United Kingdom, France, the various members of this international coalition. Do you think that these are false flags attacks being designed to basically lure us all into war?
Yes, absolutely. And but we have to understand that it's not black versus white, it's not Jewish versus Christian, it's criminal organization, and that's another thing that I object to strenuously. Jason, these aren't terrorist groups, they're criminal groups. And there is plenty of remedies in American law, Canadian law, United Kingdom law, New Zealand, you know, the Five Eyes countries, and Australia, to deal with criminal groups. There are no laws to deal satisfactorily with terrorist groups because terror is very poorly defined. I mean, everyone can be terrified of an anthrax attack, right? But if they don't bother to find out who the terrorists are, right, ultimately you're chasing shadows around the world. So there are stocks of Novicihok agents around the world, and any one of those could fall into the hands of criminals, and that's what the Russians have been finding. That's what this recent article is. It appears that the agent that the West describes as Novicihok was sold from a government research laboratory in Russia to criminal groups. So we should be going after criminal groups, not terrorist groups. Right? Now, how do you link a global community of crime groups? Well, you go into the patent office. And let me just read you, and I think I sent it to you, some elements of the patent which was granted in 2000. And the number of the patent is US 095-14771. And I'll just read it. So it's a prisoner tracking and warning system and corresponding methods, abstract.
Sorry, could you just give me that patent number again? I'm sorry, David.
US 095-14771.
I'll bring that up so we can look at that.
Now, very interesting, before I go back into that abstract text, we should look at the assignee. Now, it's the name of a guy called Jerome Lemelson, Lemelson, one of the most prolific inventors in American history.
Really?
Right? In the last year of his life, I believe he applied for 40 patents. And this is one of them. Right? Now, I think what this guy was doing, I think he was a fairly inventive and creative guy. I think he was going through existing patents. He had a good knowledge of what was in process in various government and major defense contractor departments, and he was abstracting from them a prediction of what the future might look like and then patenting it.
He's from Staten Island, almost a chemical weapon in and of itself.
Yeah. Well, that's right. And the Fresh Kills landfill is on Staten Island.
Indeed.
Right?
Yes.
And Garbage Hills 1 and 9 contains a lot of fragments of the 343 firefighters in New York who were walked into an ambush in Towers 1 and 2.
Right.
And my statement is, and one doesn't have to be a forensic investigator, is to say, well, let's dig up those body bits which are in the garbage piles, because, you know, the mentality of the Bernadine Dawn and Bill Ayers is, well, firefighters are just garbage, right? We'll bury it. But you know what they're burying? They're burying evidence of the temperature of which those firefighters died.
Right, now, the bodies could be forensically examined.
Exactly. The enamel of their teeth will show the distance from the hottest part of those towers as they came down, which would have been the elevators. In the elevator shaft, there were ultra-high temperature accelerants. Right? Now, I'm straying actually from the patent. Let's come back to this prisoner tracking.
Sure.
Did you find that on your?
I did. Yes, you should be able to see it on your screen there. Prisoner tracking and warning system and corresponding methods. Shall I read you the abstract?
Yes. Okay. You read it. Yeah.
It says the present invention discloses a general overall system 30 and a general overall method 10. For tracking, monitoring, and learning prisoner or parolee behavior. The system and method involve obtaining prisoner or parolee data and monitoring the data for at least one individual prisoner or parolee, storing the prisoner or parolee data, and monitoring the data into a database, learning prisoner or parolee behavior from the prisoner or parolee data and the monitoring data in the database. It sounds an awful lot like things we've heard about from Palantir and companies like that, maybe iGento or other things.
Yeah, and this guy, Lemelson Jerome, who had a long career inventing things, it would appear that he invented, and I talked about red cameras earlier on, he invented some of the early sort of video cameras technology.
Really? Huh.
So I think in 1982 a film came out called Sex, Lies and Videotape.
Yep.
Does that ring a bell?
Yep.
Quite a famous film.
Mm-hmm.
And that would be 4 years after Field McConnell's sister, Kristine Marcy, conceived what was described in an article by Judy Mann in Washington Post as a Mendenhall's baby.
Right. I remember that
is
bizarre article.
Right. Well, and I found it bizarre, so I looked up, and again, I don't want to shock your listeners, but I looked up Mendenhall. I could find very few references to it until I stumbled on the Urban Dictionary definition of Mendenhall. And again, I don't know whether I want to shock.
Yeah, it is quite strange. So the first thing I wanted to do was bring up that article about, so it was
Kristine Marcy.
Yeah, there we go. Here, I've got it right.
And I think it was Judy Mann, I think was the writer, she's now dead, who was I don't know whether she was a lesbian, but she was a feminist and an activist, believing that women had been denied their rights because of, nasty, chauvinistic, pig white men, etc., etc., and they needed a bit of a boost. Right. And it was Judy Mann who wrote this article, and about 8 or 9 paragraphs in, where Kristine Marcy is describing herself as the most extraordinary individual who took a law exam, had a baby, went back into work in the Office of Management and Budget or the Office of Personnel Management, and forever after changed the way men looked at women. Right? But unfortunately for Kristine Marcy, Field's sister, it apparently she conceived a Mendenhall's baby.
Yes. And I was quite surprised the other day when we were talking about this, and you mentioned that Mendenhall and the Urban Dictionary, and I looked it up, and it is rather shocking, but I think we should discuss it with the viewers right now. The top definition for Mendenhall is to mount someone from behind while they are in the fetal position on the ground. After the deed is complete, you roll them over and see the humiliation in their eyes. This is best accomplished in front of a large audience.
That's pretty shattering, isn't it?
It's almost difficult to understand because, I mean, it's basically describing a rape in front of an audience. And so for an article in the Washington Post to be discussing this is quite bizarre, to say the least.
Well, it is. And so when I said, all right, well, Mendenhall's baby, I wonder who that might be, I asked Field who might have been conceived in November of 1978, the year before the Senior Executive Service was launched under Jimmy Carter. And it turns out, it would appear, that it's his niece, Jessica Marcy. Right? So, of course, me being me, I wanted to find out, well, who might have been at the other end of the Mendenhall situation, if that's not a mixed metaphor. So I wanted to find out who would have been in Washington who might have set up an opportunity for Kristine Marcy to appear in a Sex, Lies and Videotape type movie where she could be subsequently blackmailed. And go ahead.
Are you familiar with Field's niece? Have you ever met her or seen her?
No, but part of the Abel Danger research team put a collage together. I'm just not adept enough at the computer, which showed Kristine Marcy on the right, Jessica Marcy in the middle, and then what I presume to be, and I've checked around, a picture of a man by the name of Nicholas Soames, who is the grandson of Winston Churchill.
Right.
who was in Washington at the time as a personal assistant to Senator Mark Hatfield, who would go on to become the chairman of the Senate Appropriations Committee, which I understand to be one of the most powerful committees in the United States government because it does the earmarking and pork barreling.
Right. And again, of course, you and I discussed this for the first time the other day, and I found it all quite shocking. This individual, Nicholas Soames, is quite a scary-looking British politician. He was what was his title? He was the right, let's see, let's look him up on it.
Yeah, it's a long title, but what's very interesting is he was the United Kingdom Defense Minister under John Major from 1994 to 1997.
Right.
And being the grandson of Winston Churchill, he would have known all about the Churchill's toy shop.
Correct.
Right. And so, Churchill's, go ahead.
The Right Honorable Sir Nicholas Soames and the Shadow Secretary of State, which when I first heard that title, it sounded very shadowy and odd to me, but you educated me in some aspects of British government that I was unaware of. This is not a shadow government, deep state type of thing in the way that we typically use those terms. This is an individual who shadows the elected secretary or appointed secretary to make sure there's a balance there. So
yeah.
he's sort
so
of.
we have a bicameral House. I think the same in the Senate and Congress in the United States. Bicameral meaning there are two major parties, and so you have a cabinet set up by the Prime Minister of the day, similar to what President Trump has done with his cabinet. So members of his cabinet, for example, include the Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross, who's Kappa Beta Phi, which is a Greek life society of very dubious origins, actually 1776, right? And I believe many of these Greek life societies, if you look at their hazing or initiation ceremonies, they're designed to actually entrap the novices, if that's the right word, into membership of the Greek life societies, from where on they can be subsequently blackmailed. So, you know, Bill Clinton is Phi Beta Kappa, and Wilbur Ross is Kappa Beta Phi. As the case of Kappa Beta Phi, they meet, I think, once a year at the St. Regis Hotel in New York. They do a bit of cross-dressing. They say sexist jokes. Significant number of them are billionaires or millionaires. And I'm thinking, well, maybe those are the world bankers that Rockefeller was talking about, right? On the other side of that, you have Phi Beta Kappa, of which George H. Bush and Bill Clinton are members. I think Bill Clinton became Phi Beta Kappa in 1968 before he went to Oxford as a Rhodes Scholar to study philosophy, politics, and economics, before he was kicked out for rape and drug dealing. So I'm thinking, you know, why would Americans pick a guy like that to be the president of the United States?
Well, I don't know if we picked him or if the deep state picked him.
No, the British picked it. The British picked him.
Right. It's interesting, and it comes back to the main topic of today's show, and I apologize for digressing, but when I put in Jessica Marcy and Kristine Marcy, I come up with this blog post from National Geographic, and this appears to have been entered in 2009. Jessica Marcy served as a Peace Corps volunteer in Mali from 2003 to 2005, and currently, or at least in 2009, worked as a web reporter at Kaiser Health News, a nonprofit news service committed to in-depth coverage of healthcare and policy. And of course, when I search for Kristine Marcy here, there is this thing. We would have to read the posts here, and the thumbnail image appears to be missing, but they're talking about L'École de Madame Kristine Marcy. And then it goes on to say, my mom actually just returned last week from Mali. She took a trip there to volunteer with Global Smile. So it does seem that this Jessica Marcy, who is writing for National Geographic, is in fact the daughter of Kristine Marcy, referring to her as my mom. And so we can see a photograph of someone named Jessica Marcy right here on LinkedIn, who is a filmmaker and the creative lead. Went to Columbia University Graduate School of Journalism and lives in the Washington, D.C. metro. Do you believe, David, that this person might be the Jessica Marcy that is the niece of Field McConnell?
Oh, totally. And maybe the granddaughter of Winston Churchill.
Wow.
Because if Nicholas Soames was in Washington in November of 1978 when the Mendenhall's baby was conceived, right? Then all we need to do is get a photograph of Nicholas Soames, and that's been done, and put it beside Jessica Marcy, and it's a bit like the Chelsea Clinton Webster Hubble, you know, where that loose sort of jowly type, and really, what horrifies me is that almost inevitably we're throwing the spotlight on a probably innocent woman, which is Jessica Marcy, right? Who, if she really is the Mendenhall's baby, conceived by Nicholas Soames, what a way to blackmail a woman who would become the most powerful woman in America, and that's Kristine Marcy. Now, why people might say, well, who the hell is, again, it's one of these situations, you've got a bureaucrat that's so deeply buried in the American psyche, most people have never heard of her, even though we've been banging on for about 10 years about this woman and how dangerous she is.
But how, I don't understand, David, how would this man, being the father of Jessica Marcy, a very likely innocent individual, how would that constitute blackmail of anyone?
Well, because if you are under sex lies and videotape, if someone's videotaping Kristine Marcy being mounted from behind in the fetal position and then rolled over to see the humiliation in her eyes in front of a large audience, that would be pretty embarrassing for Kristine Marcy.
Right.
Right?
I don't remember the film Sex, Lies, and Videotape, what it was all about. But...
Oh, I think it was 1982, and just the title itself, but I'm always interested in the technology. So I'm interested in who invented the technology of the videotape. Well, it turns out
it's
Jerome Lemelson, the man who is the original assignee for this prisoner tracking.
Really? So how does that correlate?
Well, that means you've got a Jerome Lemelson, a highly creative person who's trolling through the patent office, trolling around the defense establishment and the United States Department of Defense, looking for technologies that he can subsequently patent and then collect royalties. And what I'm saying is, for me, it's highly likely this guy was being blackmailed. Because again, if you control the patent office of a sovereign power, you control the sovereign power. And in the United States, the British control the patent office, the United States Patent and Trademark Office, and they've done it since 1802. When the first patent superintendent was the Anglo-American William Thornton. Now, unfortunately, I've got to leave it in about 16 minutes, Jason. I hope I haven't let you down there. Did you want to focus some discussion in the next 16 minutes?
Well, I mean, again, it's always fascinating, David, to see the directions that we go in and the connections that are made. I think that what we really want to talk about and think about is how the Novicihok gas, you know, we've identified from your previous interviews that there are stocks of Novicihok in Chicago at Northwestern University. You and I were speaking the other day, and I think I just Googled Novicihok and patent, and we came up with a new company. Have you been able to look into that?
Yes, I looked at that, and let me just. I looked at it, and it didn't lead a lot further. But let me just go back to Northwestern University.
Sure.
Northwestern University has a patent granted to it for a detoxification system for nerve gases that include VX and Novicihok.
Yes.
And that's under the auspices of the Defense Threat Reduction Agency. The Defense Threat Reduction Agency, if you Google Senior Executive Service and the Defense Threat Reduction Agency, to all intents and purposes, the Senior Executive Service, which was founded by Kristine Marcy, controls the Defense Threat Reduction Agency. Now, next
We've heard so much about the Senior Executive Services lately, and varying opinions from it's the worst thing since the Nazis to it's simply a higher pay grade. what is this Defense Threat Reduction Agency, and what should we know about it?
Well, like its name implies, it looks around the world to see if there are stocks of Novicihok or various other chemical or biological or radiological or nuclear or explosive weapons that should be dismantled in order to increase the security of the world. Unfortunately, the Senior Executive Service is embedded in the Defense Threat Reduction Agency, so they would have had access to the Novicihok stocks at Northwestern University, right? Now, all they need to put on an attack in Salisbury, in Wiltshire, is to find a team of people, let's call it a SWAT team, a Special Weapons and Tactics team, that could be flown into the crime scene before the crime occurs, where there's a script written by the government and a cover-up arranged by the government before the crime occurs. So how do you transport SWAT teams unintercepted into an area, a crime scene, before the crime occurs? Well, you go to Kristine Marcy and say, please, Kristine, can we use one of your United States Justice Prisoner and Alien Transportation System planes, which have been droned courtesy of a conversation between Field McConnell and his sister of December 1988, right? So
it's amazing.
So she was, I was trying to estimate how many prisoners she might have flown, perhaps under this prisoner tracking and warning system, around the world since she didn't invent the idea, since her conversation of December 1988 with her brother, Field McConnell, where she told him, look, the airlines don't like transporting prisoners shackled to the seat because of safety, so we're thinking of buying our own planes. Well, that's a giveaway. Why would a woman who's a senior bureaucrat think that she could buy her own planes, a quasi-private airline? Well, she created with Eric Holder the United States Department of Justice Asset Forfeiture Fund in 1984.
With Eric Holder?
With Eric Holder. And also she created in 1984 the database for the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. This is a seriously powerful woman.
Yeah.
Right? Because she can track the children that have gone missing. She can put the parents in jail. She's now separated parental protection from the young, vulnerable child. She takes that child in ConAir plane to a different state, right? Outside a prison. Maybe the children come into the prison and actually service the prisoners. And that's one way of keeping the prisoners loyal and obedient. Now, if you think that's off the wall, that's exactly what happened with the famous Cray twins in the United Kingdom. These ran the London Underground, the London Underworld. They were arrested in '69 and they were put in jail for life. And behind bars, Jason, they ran a protection racket.
What kind of protection racket?
Right, like
there's a film about this where Tom, what's his name? The actor played both of the twins, I believe.
That's right. Famous guys, but pedophile psychopaths. Okay,
wow.
Both of them. And they used, they had arranged pedophile orgies to entrap and blackmail politicians, including people like Edward Heath, the former Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. And they exported that model to the United States.
These guys were the foremost perpetrators of organized crime in the East End of London in the 1950s and the 1960s.
Correct.
And the movie was called The Craze.
Right, and the protection racket would include, for example, providing 19 thugs as a protection to Frank Sinatra when he attended Wimbledon in 1988. But what the Craze were running is they were pedophile pimps, right? They had networks out, so for a Hollywood star or a Saudi prince, they can arrange children.
Right.
And an encounter in a 4-star or 5-star hotel well out of the reach of the FBI or the equivalent, the RCMP or the Scotland Yard in the United Kingdom, who are totally under-resourced in comparison with these criminals.
Right.
So now you've got the Cray twins that have developed or invented or perfected this model of running a protection racket from behind bars with a nearly perfect alibi. They're visited on a regular basis by members of their gangs, right? And they get a mission, which is to go out and protect or extort money from a Saudi prince or a Hollywood star like Frank Sinatra.
Right.
So in the shadows, this is the deep state. These are criminal organizations based within the prison system, courtesy of people like Kristine Marcy, who was senior counsel for the United States Marshal Service, right? And she was flying these people around, and I can guarantee, well, no, I can't guarantee you, I will bet, Jason, that she provided the explosive experts to bomb the Murrah building in Oklahoma City.
Wow. Joe Napoli wants to know if this is connected to the IRA.
Well, of course it is. The IRA is a franchise, British intelligence, right?
Wow.
And they used orphanages in Ireland to entrap people on both sides, and they ran them against the middle. British intelligence basically always operates on a divide and rule basis. And that's
Right.
what the United States is facing right now. They've come in, they've created these false flag attacks, right? And they're trying to get Russia and China and the United States at loggerheads, right? If there's a shooting war or a killing war, so be it. Remember that the Dawn said we need 25 million dead. Well, 25 million dead, which might be in 1 week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks' time, where the world is, is in total chaos, that increases the power of the people who have access to the patent pool.
Why does it do that?
Well, because the patent pool is the place where all of these weapons capable of mass destruction reside, and all you need to do is to pay the patentee, or in this case, let's say Jerome Lemelson, were he alive, you pay for the right to use their patent for a limited period, let's say for 911. So you might have the Boeing uninterruptible autopilot. So the deep state, or SERCO, goes to Boeing. Remember, it's got 10 global custodians as shareholders, puts $50 million in the bank of Boeing in Chicago. Remember, the headquarters have been moved down to Chicago, and said, we want to license your uninterruptible autopilots for 30 hours during an exercise, a continuity of government exercise called Global Guardian. So Boeing might, after all, it's developed an anti-hijacking uninterruptible autopilot. $50 million goes into the Boeing bank account. And then the Boeing directors wake up in the morning of 911, and to their horror, they see the device that they developed for anti-hijacking being used to fly the decoy and drone maneuvers of 911. What do? Well, you've got the money in your account, right? There's an audit trail that shows that you were paid for using this equipment. Then you have to say, well, I didn't do it. I didn't know it. And then you look like a fool.
Wow. And Global Guardian, of course, is an annual training exercise sponsored by U.S. Strategic Command. And if you look
at the image for the Global Guardian exercise of September the 10th to the 12th, right in the middle of it is a picture of what looks like Osama bin Laden. So to say, oh, surprise, surprise, who was this guy? They rehearsed it in the exercise, and you can probably find it, called Amalgam Virgo, of the 1st and 2nd of June of 2001, where, Jason, the target for that exercise was the Capitol building.
Amalgam Virgo.
Amalgam, A-M-A-L-G-A-M, Virgo, V-I-R-G-O.
Yes, I've found it.
And if you look at the briefing document, the front page of that, right, there's a picture, and in the center of that picture is the Red Team commander, Osama bin Laden.
And this is dated June 2001.
Correct. So it was a rehearsal, a full dress rehearsal, where you had a blue team in the United States trying to defend the United States against a simulated attack, which involved, I think it was a Boeing 757 hijacked in the simulation over Alaska, flying south over a town called Abbotsford in British Columbia, then turning east, and the target is the Capitol building, which was designed by Dr. William Thornton, the first superintendent of the United States Patent and Trademark Office.
Why is that significant?
Well, it's significant because William Thornton was Anglo-American. He was appointed by Jefferson as the first superintendent of the Patent Office. He was the architect for the Capitol building, so let's say that. But around 1811, he was approached by a guy who had invented a rifle to grant a patent. And Dr. William Thornton said, well, I'm not going to grant you the patent because it's got too many features that resemble the Ferguson rifle patented in 1776 in the United Kingdom. However, if you add my name to the patent, I'll grant you the patent. So already you've got an indication that the British are weaseling their way through into the American Patent Office. And today, unfortunately for the United States of America, the British control the United States Patent Office, which is not very smart, if I may be so rude.
David, it's mind-blowing information how it connects and all of these. It's a lot to think about.
Let me give you one very concrete example, right?
Please.
And I think I might have talked about that already. It relates to the murder, and it's a cold case. So your listeners, everyone I think who's listening to us today, there's a secret Sherlock Holmes in them. They would love to be able to follow the clues and identify the culprit before the author reveals it in the last chapter. Do you think that's fair?
Yes.
Okay, so you take Valerie Percy. I think she was murdered in 1966 in her parents' home in Chicago, a mansion, so very wealthy. Her father, Charles Percy, was the chairman of Bell and Howell.
Right.
And remember, the Zapruder camera. Abraham Zapruder was using a Bell and Howell top-of-the-range directors ringed with patents, etc., to film the JFK assassination and capture the money shot of his head being blown up. Right?
The ultimate snuff film.
The ultimate snuff film, with what would have been possible to time exactly when he died, because the other shots hadn't killed him, but when his brain was splattered over the back of the vehicle, then obviously the guy was dead. So Valerie Percy would have been in a position to suspect that maybe that Bell and Howell camera that was supplied to Abraham Zapruder was part of a conspiracy, in which case the conspirators would have been concerned about her as a potential whistleblower, right?
Right.
So now, how do you kill her and make it look or get away with that murder? Now, I think, have we discussed this before?
We have, and we saw an individual whose name escapes me at the moment.
Peter G. Peterson.
Peter
right?
G. Peterson?
Yes, and I'll race because in 2 minutes I got to go. But
sure.
What happened is, so I Google for a patent that might fit the injuries reported to Valerie Percy, and it turns out she's got a triangular dent in her skull, and she's been stabbed multiple times in the breast and the belly. So yes. I look up patent, Bell and Howell, see if I can find a possible weapon, and I find a tripod which fits perfectly the characteristics of that crime scene. I then Google...
Is this Peter George Peterson?
Yes, correct. He's just died. And he
banker?
went on to become... Yes, he went on to become the chairman of the Council on Foreign Relations.
Oh, my goodness.
And he was the chairman of Blackstone Private Equity Group, which owned the mortgage on building number 7.
Right, right. Is this
QED?
him?
Yeah, and if you get a picture of him at 26 and put that beside the suspect identified by Valerie Percy's mother, right, with a police sketch, and he shone his light into her eyes, so she got a glimpse of it, but there's a police sketch of the suspect. You put the police sketch of the suspect who evidently bludgeoned and stabbed Valerie Percy to death besides Peter G. Peterson at around the age of 26. And for me, I don't know if that's a term that carries into the States, he's a dead ringer.
Right.
I think Peter G. Peterson bludgeoned Valerie Percy to death. He went on to a career to become the chairman of the Council on Foreign Relations. And I'm very, very apologetic because I've got another appointment to go to, Jason.
It's
but
totally
perhaps
fine.
we can resume at any time of your convenience that fits.
Wonderful, David. And of course, people can go back into the archives of Crowdsource the Truth and look for our previous interview where I did have that sketch of Peter G. Peterson. Thank you for your time, David. I appreciate it tremendously. I'll speak to you soon and enjoy your next appointment. And we'll talk about this in a future conversation, but there's so much here. It's absolutely amazing. And of course, people can see more of David's work at abeldanger.org, correct? A-B...
Correct.
Here
okay.
it is.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Jason, and I better go.
Very good. See you soon,
Bye.
David. Have a nice day. So that was David Hawkins of Abel Danger, and people can see his work and his work with Field McConnell, of course, at abeldanger.org. Just bringing that up right here. I think I misspelled it one time, and now it always shows up wrong automatically. But of course, Abel Danger, very popular website. Field McConnell and David Hawkins are constantly coming out with intelligence updates, and you can get their work there on BitChute. I'm pleased to see that they don't seem to be posting on Steemit anymore. That might be based on some of the evidence that we've been exploring that would seem to indicate Steemit has some possible issues. Evidence seems to indicate it could be a financial scam. Don't know. Still trying to find out. I want to thank everyone for tuning in. Please remember, Crowdsource the Truth is a community-sponsored news website. We do not rely on Ponzi schemes or cryptocurrency of dubious value. We rely on your sponsorship, and it's very important. Everyone who likes this show and wants to see it continue, please consider becoming a monthly sponsor at patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth or paypal.me/crowdsourcethetruth. We'll be back in just a little while at 6 p.m. where Charles Ortel will be closing in. Thanks for watching.